Hey everyone, welcome back to I Heart Movies. My name is Jonathan North, and it has been a while. By this time, I should know myself better than to just casually assume I could handle launching a whole new podcast, and doing a 4 episode miniseries, and moving across the state all in the same month. But obviously, I don't. And those were just the things I had planned. This month has been far crazier than I expected to be, and my schedule here on iHeart Movies has just kind of flown out the window for the time being. In the last episode here, before I launched Every Version Ever, I teased that the next episode would be the beginning of an all-new Disney movie marathon miniseries that would focus on the Latin American films of Disney's war era, starting with Saludos Amigos. And then I got to work on Every Version Ever, and at this point it's basically the end of June, so I've decided to postpone that miniseries because there's no way I'm going to be able to finish it before July, and I'm a stickler for tradition, and I need to do Christmas in July. So, instead of starting that miniseries, I have a brand new episode that I recorded this month with Eli Sanza. Last month, HBO Max launched along with the first season of an all-new series of Looney Tunes cartoons called Looney Tunes Cartoons. Such an amazing descriptive title, but really that's what the show is, so I guess they didn't need to fancy it up. Still, I grew up with the Bugs Bunny and Tweety show, so I guess I was hoping for something a little more imaginative, but it doesn't matter. Anyway, it turns out that despite several failed reboots of Looney Tunes in the past 20 years, this one might actually be one that's able to stick around. Early reviews have praised it as almost as good as the originals, and a lot of people think it's one of the best things the Looney Tunes have done since the 60s. So in the interest of science, I got an early bird discount for HBO Max for the sole purpose of watching these new cartoons. Once I did that, I really wanted to talk about them, and I knew Eli was a big fan of Looney Tunes and had been talking about this new show on Twitter, so I had to have him on the show to talk about it. So, I guess the first thing is, what overall did you think of the new Looney Tunes cartoons?
Surprisingly, really well done. Like I every time I talk about it, I keep telling people that it's the best iteration of that series of films since the cartoons in the 1930s, 40s, and 50s.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's. I said time will tell if it'll measure up because I don't think it has yet. But
Mm-hmm.
so far, it's the most promising it's ever been because no iteration of Looney Tunes or Merrie Melodies has ever been as good as the ones that were made in the golden age
Mm-hmm.
until now. Until now.
Yeah, I feel similar. I feel like it's really good so far, but as far as being as good as the originals, I feel like it can be hit or miss in that regard. Like some I think probably are, they're hilarious, and others are funny,
Mhm.
but they're not quite as funny as the old ones.
Yeah. Well, the thing I would say is that a lot of the old Looney Tunes cartoons were actually a lot of them were really good, but they were hit and miss too if you look at the entire filmography.
Uh-huh.
And so were a lot of the episodes of Tiny Toons and Animaniacs. Those were also hit and miss, but
Yeah.
the ones that were good were really brilliant. So I feel like continuing the legacy of the company's animation, it is pretty accurate on the quality level.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. For me, I'm just glad that we're getting more stories with these characters.
Yes, absolutely. Like I missed seeing. You know what I missed. I missed Daffy Duck being actually acting like Looney, like he did in the
Uh-huh.
old days before he got all bitter and as Bugs' rival. I missed that.
Yeah.
That is one of my favorite things about it. That they went back to the sort of Tex Avery-ish, Bob Clampett-ish version of Daffy.
Yeah. He's like actually insane now instead of being, like you said, bitter.
Yeah, insane. Like the best example of that is probably like a. You say you watched all of these, right?
Yeah, I've watched all 10 that they have out so far.
Okay, yeah. The best example of that is probably the one called Plumber's Quack, where Porky hires Daffy Duck to be his plumber. Like
Uh-huh.
I feel like that's the best example that I would give to people to show them how this version of Daffy is a version that I really love.
Yeah, I also like the one, I can't remember the name of it, but he was messing with Porky's cement. Porky was trying to lay a pad of cement, and Daffy
Yes,
kept messing it up.
Yes, I love that. So that was a good one. That one was called Wet Cement.
Okay, yeah. So what do you think overall of like the art style?
The art style, I really liked it. It was really cartoony,
Hmm.
and that's what I liked about it because it needs to be cartoony in order for the reason why those cartoons were so funny was because of partly because of how wild they were in terms of the art style too, because the art sometimes the drawings that the animators did was the reason why some scenes were funny,
Hmm.
and I think they're doing a good job. They're doing a good job here too, and it's also it reminds me a little bit of how it's a little bit. It reminds me a little bit of Nicktoons. It's got a Nicktoons vibe to it because it's especially how Nicktoons used to be like in the '90s,
Hmm.
because they were sort of like which is weird because it seems like those cartoons in the '80s and '90s are kind of evoking the golden age of animation more so than cartoons in the '60s and '70s. But whenever I see modern versions of this type of wacky humor, it reminds me of '90s because those were the ones that were the best examples of evoking that. But now this reboot of cartoons from the '40s is reminding me of cartoons from the '90s. Now it's sort of a weird time loop. But yeah, I did like that. I did like the art style a lot.
Hmm. What about the animation itself?
Animation itself was really good. I was hoping that it would be full animation like they did in the old days. It wasn't quite full animation. It was a lot of there was some flash involved,
Hmm.
but I didn't hold that against it because the most important thing about it was I felt the humor and the writing, which I thought they nailed. So that wasn't the most important thing. So I could forgive them for that. That was more like a personal wish, but there was some moments in the cartoons that felt you could tell they were hand drawn. It wasn't all flash. There was a lot of hand drawn in there, especially in the more cartoony moments because they needed to be more fluid in order to convey the joke and that they were trying to convey. And I thought they did a good job utilizing the animation tools. Like this was mostly Yowza Animation was the one that animated a lot of the Flash stuff. But I still thought they did a good job because their cartoons were really funny.
I didn't really notice a whole lot of shortcuts that like using Flash. To me, it looked mostly hand drawn, and I feel like a lot of people were criticizing it at the very beginning because they were saying that it's not really hand drawn because they're drawing it on tablets, but like they're still using their hands. It's just because it's not on paper doesn't mean it's not hand drawn. And I think they did a really good job of blending it so that you barely could tell when they were taking any shortcuts.
Yeah. And even if you could tell that it was being drawn on a tablet, like they say, like the drawings were still really good, and the art style was still really good, and I felt like that sort of saved it from the mercy of my criticism because
Hmm.
that stuff worked so well, and there was a lot of funny animation in it, like like no matter what the technique was, it was just hilarious regardless.
Well, digital art has come such a long way that you can do fully digital art and have it still be hand drawn and even look like it was drawn on paper, but it's still drawn on the computer. And I feel like if someone's able to do that and make it look great, then I don't think we should be criticizing them for not using paper and pencils. I think that
Yeah,
they did a really good job on this show.
yeah, I totally agree.
What did you think of the music?
No, the music, yeah. Oh, the music was good. The music was fine. It was like You could tell that the person who composed the music was very. It was trying to evoke the
Hmm.
feeling of the old cartoons from Carl Stalling, and he
Yeah.
did a good job with that because there was some Carl Stalling ish touches in
Hmm.
the new cartoons. You could a lot of times Carl Stalling liked to sample from actual songs, and there were some moments in this where that happened, and that I liked because there was some familiarity with the old
Hmm.
series that made me fall in love with it even more. Even though it's a nostalgia trap, but it works on me.
Yeah. I thought the music was great. I think that they did a really good job of making it feel like the old cartoons. And I'm not sure if they had a full orchestra or not, but it certainly sounded like it. And if they were mixing it on computers and they weren't using a full orchestra, they did a really good job of making it sound like it was a full orchestra because I, to me, it sounded almost exactly like old cartoons. Just, I loved the music that they were using.
Yeah, me too. And I also agree with you that whether it was a full orchestra or computer synthesizers, like it doesn't matter because it sounded really amazing.
Hmm. So, in the past decade, there have been two pretty notable attempts at rebooting the Looney Tunes. We had first the Looney Tunes show back, I think it was in 2010, so 10 years ago now. And then we had Wabbit, which became the new Looney Tunes. Did you
Yeah.
watch those shows? And if so, how do you think they compare to this new iteration?
My opinion about the Looney Tunes show that came on Cartoon Network, uh, I don't criticize it as much as other people do because a lot of people didn't like that show because they thought it was not keeping in the spirit of the old cartoons because it felt like okay, this is Bugs and Daffy living in an apartment.
Hmm.
It's kind of like a Seinfeld meets Looney Tunes thing, and it was like a sitcom, and for what it was attempting to do, it actually worked pretty well because if you watch the show with no bias whatsoever and just then it's a pretty funny show actually, but
Hmm.
it's not very satisfying if you're trying to look for something that evokes the spirit of the classic cartoons. So in that regard, it's definitely not as good as the new cartoons. And as for Wabbit, I that was sort of more of an attempt to evoke the spirit of the old cartoons, but it it felt too much like a hard reboot. It didn't feel like the actual cartoons. It felt more like a ordinary Cartoon Network show, like the kinds of shows that they had at the time. Like it felt like a regular show or like the amazing gumball or whatever it was called. It just felt more like that and not enough like the older cartoons, which is what I didn't like about it. I remember watching it and not liking it because I was hoping it was going to be more like Looney Tunes,
Hmm.
but it felt more like just an average Cartoon Network comedy, which I didn't like.
Yeah, I was not a fan of Wabbit either. I haven't watched it since it became the new Looney Tunes, so I don't actually know if it improved at all. It just felt like they were trying way too hard to modernize the Looney Tunes. Like it didn't even
Yeah,
really feel like the Looney Tunes. Like it was the Looney Tunes in name only almost. It was weird. Like by all accounts I should have liked it, but I just could not get into it. Like I watched it and kept watching it, hoping it would get better, and it never did. So I eventually just stopped watching it. And then
yeah,
with the Looney Tunes show, I feel like I'm in the minority because I absolutely loved that show. I thought it was
uh,
hilarious. It did have a
yeah,
few stinker episodes. There were some episodes I just didn't like. But for the most part, I loved that show. I thought it was hilarious. I thought it was really well written. And yeah, it didn't feel like the classic Looney Tunes cartoons, but I don't think it was really meant to. It was supposed to be a new take on them. It was supposed to be taking these classic characters and putting them in a sitcom setting. That was the point. It was a totally new take on them, and I thought that they did a great job with it. Plus, I loved their take on Lola Bunny. I know a lot of people like to complain about her, but I thought she was hilarious. She was one of my favorite parts of the show. She was just insane in the best way. And I thought it was so
yeah.
great that they had Kristen Wiig playing her, and she did an amazing job. I loved this version of Lola Bunny.
Yeah, I love Kristen Wiig, and I didn't mind Lola Bunny. She was a fine character. And like I said before, the show is not bad. So I kind of agree with you. It was for what it attempted to be. It did a good job, and I've watched a few episodes of it, I laughed watching it. So
Hmm.
apparently I think it's funny. So I can't really complain about it. It was a good show.
I'm kind of hoping that they find a way to bring Lola back for this new series. Like I know it wouldn't be like completely in the spirit of the old cartoons if they have a new character, but like I just want more of Kristen Wiig's Lola. She was just so funny. I miss her weirdness.
Yeah, yeah. What they might do that people might approve of is keep Lola Bunny out of the new Looney Tunes cartoons and give her her own show instead.
I'd be down for that.
That would get your stamp of approval.
Yeah. Yeah, I'd love
Yeah,
that.
yeah. That's something that you might go like ask the higher ups about if you're in the business. That could work.
Yeah, I mean that's like the perfect compromise. If she can't be in this show, just give her something else to do. And I have a feeling that she'll be in the new Space Jam movie, but I'm sure they're going to go back to the uh, sultry version that she came in with in Space Jam. She was basically there to be
Yeah,
eye candy for Bugs, and she wasn't loony enough for me. I guess I did like her, but I like the loony crazy version so much more than the uh, hot version.
yeah. It's gonna be interesting to see what they do with her because I'm gonna watch that movie definitely,
Yeah,
and they're gonna have to address her in some way whether she's in it or not. So I just want to see how they're gonna handle that.
yeah, definitely. So we've talked about a lot of what we liked about the show. Was there anything about it that you didn't like?
Let me see. I I can't. I'm gonna be honest. I can't think of anything that's really worth complaining about. It's like I thought it was pretty well done. But the only thing I would say if I had to think of something that I didn't like was probably just the fact that it's sort of you could tell that the people behind these cartoons were trying to make the cartoons as much like the old cartoons as possible. That was kind of the point. They wanted to bring back the looniness in
Hmm.
Looney Tunes because a lot of Looney Tunes weren't as loony as they used to be. The only negative thing I could think of if I try to find something bad about it is just that if you compare it to the old cartoons, it just suffers in comparison just slightly
Hmm.
because I don't like comparing it to them because I like to just judge things as if they're the only things that exist in the universe. I just want to put my full focus on this thing I'm watching and not compare it to anything else.
Hmm.
But but if I had to think of something negative, it would be that the hit and miss ratio is more miss than hit in the way that the old cartoons were more hit than miss.
I think I get that. I think my one complaint, I guess it would be, is sort of in that vein of having them trying to capture how loony the old ones are. And I feel like in certain episodes, and I haven't gone to check and see who the directors are to see if it's one specific director's fault or not, but I feel like occasionally they kind of overcorrect and they're too, I guess maybe just too violent. Like the old Looney Tunes cartoons were definitely violent, but
Yeah.
there was a few instances where it just felt like they went farther than the old cartoons ever would go, specifically
I
in
think I.
terms of like exposed skeletons of characters. And one
Oh, I
point,
know what you're
like
talking about.
Yosemite Sam's skin gets ripped off, stuff like that.
Oh
And it's
yeah.
always like
Oh yeah.
brief, but enough that it was like it didn't feel like Looney Tunes anymore, just for that split second.
I see what you're talking about. Actually, yeah, I forgot about that. There are some moments where I think, okay, yeah, the exposed skeleton is the kind of thing that's definitely the kind of thing that they wouldn't have done in the old days. I don't think but it seems more like something out of like the Ren and Stimpy cartoon or something.
Yeah.
That's what it felt kind of like, and so I could see why that might be sort of off-putting. But yeah, that didn't bother me too much because a lot of the humor in those cartoons that don't seem like the kind of thing that would they would do in the old days still amused me enough where I was like,
Hmm.
well, this isn't the kind of thing they do, but this is still kind of funny, like to me. So like I'll forgive them for that because like I kind of like how they are going. I don't know. You might disagree with this, but I kind of like how they are trying to do something more than what they used to do in the old days. They're trying to top themselves a little bit. And that's what I think they're trying to do.
I think the reason it stood out to me as more of a negative is because I'm thinking about how I would have thought about this as a kid, and I'm fairly certain that I would have been really disturbed as a child if I'd seen that. Like, I didn't watch things like Ren and Stimpy, and if I ever did, it creeped me out when something like that would happen. It just, I was really
uh,
disturbed, and I feel like, and I know not all kids are like me, so most kids are probably fine with this, but for me, I feel like I would have a harder time showing a little kid these cartoons as opposed to the old ones, just because I know how I would have felt as a kid watching something like that. But for
yeah,
the most part, those were, I think there was like maybe three cartoons out of 30. I think there was usually three in each episode. So it's a very
yeah.
small ratio of ones that I would have a harder time showing to a kid. But overall, that wasn't a huge issue. It was just occasionally that something like that would come up.
Yeah, well, I do understand what you're saying because a lot of times if you compare modern cartoons to classic cartoons, there are inevitably going to be differences that you just can't do anything about because the tastes
Hmm.
of audiences have just changed so drastically from the tastes of audiences in the 1930s. So
Hmm.
some things are just going to occur to us now that wouldn't have occurred to us then, and some things that they did in the old days are not going to be as appealing to us now. Just because that's how history works. So
Hmm.
that's something I've noticed even before I started watching the series. I've noticed that that's a dynamic between modern and classic cartoons that could get in the way of a potential reboots, which is something that I usually always wish would happen with classic cartoons, that they would go back to that style. But I always thought if they did, it's probably not going to be as good because there are just for the fact that it's being made in 2019 or 2020, it's just going to inevitably come with some skeletons being exposed to like just that kind of humor.
Yeah. So, just thinking back of the show as a whole, what are some of the things that were like your absolute favorites, like either episodes or treatments of characters or just anything that really stands out as like something that you really, really liked about the new cartoons?
I have the perfect answer for this because I thought about this before. The thing that stood out for me was the cartoon about Sam Sheepdog and Ralph Wolf.
Yeah.
Yes, that cartoon uh, was one of the things that really made me love the new version because I this is the first time I was really excited watching that because this was the first time I had ever seen a new cartoon starring those characters, that
Yeah.
sheepdog and that wolf, since Chuck Jones made those cartoons. And this one in the new Looney Tunes cartoons was just as funny as the old
Hmm.
cartoons were, and I was laughing just as much as I did watching the Chuck Jones versions. And I thought they did a really good job making those characters feel like how they always have felt. So that was a particular standout moment for me because especially since those characters are so obscure next to the bigger characters like Bugs
Yeah.
and Daffy, and the fact that they're bringing them back and putting just as much care into making them feel like how they used to as they are to the other characters was one of my favorite things about the first season.
Hmm. That's something that I really liked about the Looney Tunes show was how many obscure characters that they got to come back or brought back for an episode or had as background characters. They had one episode just focused on Cecil Turtle, a very obscure Looney Tune, and you never see him anymore. So I was really excited to see that they were going to continue that with this, bringing back more obscure characters. And I really did like
Yeah,
that cartoon. That was hilarious.
yeah, and even you remember the one with Beaky Buzzard in it, right?
Yeah.
Even that one was sort of gave me the same feeling because Beaky Buzzard is another character I never saw anyone pay any attention to
Hmm.
or try to make a cartoon about that felt like the old cartoons. And they even had Beaky Buzzard's mom. It was in
Hmm.
this, and she is someone who they completely ignored since like the 40s.
Yeah. I just loved seeing more obscure characters. And I really hope that continues. I have a
Yeah,
feeling that it will because this is only, I guess, the tip of the iceberg because I know that they had commissioned like 200 hours worth of content from these different
yeah.
animators. So I really hope more attention is paid to some of the more obscure characters.
Yeah, I think there's going to be a lot because I've heard rumors about like the gremlin from the falling hair like cartoon that was
Okay.
tormenting bugs. I heard rumors that that guy was going to come back. I heard like I think Hubie and Birdie are going to come back. Probably like the abominable snowman. I think they're really going to like try to bring all the obscure ones back.
That's good. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's one thing that I really want to see more of is just more characters that we haven't seen in a while. And I guess more some of the more even you would think that they're kind of main characters, but they're not really main characters. Like I was surprised that there were no Taz cartoons. I was just waiting for a Tasmanian Devil cartoon and there wasn't one.
yeah, yeah. Because Taz is so popular.
Yeah. And I know he didn't have that many cartoons in the old days, but I feel like with the new series, you can rectify that. Give him more to do. And I was really hoping for
Yeah,
that, and I never saw him.
you know what? I hope they do because I do love that character. I feel like if you remember the old cartoons, Taz was only in like maybe like 5 or 6 of them,
Yeah,
and like so I feel like this is a good opportunity for them to rectify that because there's a lot of comedic potential with that character if they utilize it again.
yeah, definitely.
Foghorn Leghorn never showed up, which was kind of disappointing.
That's true. Yeah,
You talk about Taz, I'm talking about Foghorn. I want
yeah.
I want to see him show up. That's the biggest surprise for me when I was watching this. I wasn't expecting to see Gossamer and
Hmm.
Dr. Frankenbeans
Yeah,
like show up.
that was a great one.
Yeah, that was a great one. When Bugs was trying to watch baseball and he was trying to borrow the cable from his neighbor, which happened to be a mad scientist. So that was really brilliant.
Yeah, I
So
liked how they
yeah,
took old formats like that. Like they took them in ways that felt fresh. I was kind of afraid that a lot of these were going to feel like they were treading on the same ground. And sometimes they kind of did, but then they would take it in a new direction. Like there was one of the Roadrunner Wile E. Coyote ones where they had the same gag that I don't know if it's in more than one old cartoon or if I just watched it a whole lot as a kid, but Wile E. would paint a scene on a rock to try and get the Roadrunner to smash into it, but the Roadrunner would run through it like it was real. And then Wile E. would try to follow him and he'd crash into the rock. And they started
yeah,
doing that. And then I was like, okay, if this they don't need to really do this again. But then they turned the tables on me. They subverted my expectations by having Wile E was able to follow him into the rock, but then he gets
yeah,
stuck in the rock. I
yeah,
loved that. I did not see that coming. And there are
yeah.
more moments like that where they feel like they're going to tread the same ground and then they do something different, and I really appreciated that.
I agree with you. I noticed that the Wile E. Coyote moment was particularly really funny because I didn't see that coming either, and it was completely a new direction for that kind of gag, which I remember seeing a lot. And also I agree with you. I noticed that was happening throughout the entire season because I was like there were moments that felt familiar, like moments when like Bugs Bunny was about to say, of course, this means, but instead of saying war, he said, what I'm
Yeah.
gonna say. Like it's like that kind of thing. There was a lot of that. It was like it felt like the cartoons were made for people who are fans already, and so they were trying to make them different.
Yeah.
That's what it felt like.
Yeah. I really appreciated that. One thing that I really liked was the level of Tweety Bird. I Tweety's always been one of my favorite characters, and I kind of just figured that there wasn't going to be that much Tweety in these, but I was pleasantly surprised. I think we got 3 or 4 with Tweety, and they were all pretty good. The ice skating one was kind of I didn't really care too much about that one, but the one with the rhino in the zoo, where they cast Tweety as the bird in a symbiotic relationship with the rhino instead of like the
Yeah,
oxpecker or whatever bird it is that usually lives with the rhinos. I thought that was hilarious. That was my favorite Tweety
yeah.
one of the season.
You know what? Yeah, that was interesting because like I of all the old Looney Tunes cartoons, the Sylvester and Tweety ones were the ones that are the ones that usually on the least on my mind because like Fritz Freeling's like later cartoons in the 50s
Hmm.
were for me personally they were kind of weaker, so I don't think about a lot of those. But the Sylvester and Tweety cartoons in the new Looney Tunes were really good. I liked them, and I was worried I might not, but I thought they were perfectly funny. So I agree with you on that, and I do like Sylvester and Tweety as characters if they when they're utilized well,
Hmm.
and I thought they were in this.
So I guess in wrapping up our discussion, is there anything that you can think of that you really want to see from the series going forward? Because I know there's more coming. There's a lot more coming. So is there anything you're really hoping to see in the future?
That's a good question because this show as soon as I finished this first season, I was immediately depressed because I wanted to keep watching more. That's how much I loved this. And
Hmm.
and so I'm for now in the mindset I have now where I just crave more of these cartoons. I hope that they just keep making them exactly the way that they are now. I hope they just stay consistent
Hmm.
in what they're doing now because I think that they're really brilliant right now, and I want them to be just as funny going ahead. Hopefully, even more funny. That's my big hope, and I hope that they don't hold back on the looniness. My favorite thing about these new cartoons is that they actually feel worthy of the loony title. They actually feel loony, and that's the most important thing about these cartoons. I feel aside from the gags, is that being funny. I hope that they just keep in the spirit of what the series is about going forward and the
Hmm.
whole way.
Yeah. I have 2 really specific things that I want from future episodes that I've probably was thinking about them ever since I started watching the show. 2 things that I really wanted, and so far one maybe got a little of, the other haven't gotten yet. Kind of tying back into things I was saying about the Looney Tunes show and the more obscure characters. I want more scenes or more cartoons where unrelated Looney Tunes do something together. Like, this didn't happen a whole lot in old cartoons, but you'd occasionally get something like where Granny is being wooed by Yosemite Sam. Just things like that, where
Yeah,
2 characters who don't usually share cartoons come together for a story. I want more of that. You got a lot of that in the Looney Tunes show, and that's one thing that I really liked about the Looney Tunes show was seeing all these different characters interacting that you normally didn't get to see interacting. And I really want more of that
actually,
in the
yeah.
future.
Yeah, actually, that's a good one because I didn't think about that because I didn't think of that as a necessary thing for me. I would still be satisfied
Hmm.
if if without that. But if that did happen, I would be tickled by it. So
Yeah.
I would absolutely love it because it would be cool. Because a lot of these characters, I would like to see how they would interact with a lot of characters who they didn't normally interact with.
Hmm. Yeah, I agree. It's not exactly a necessity, but it's something that's like high on my wish list of what I want to see.
Yeah, that's a good one.
And then the other big thing that I really, really want, and this one I feel like it almost is a necessity. I want cartoons based around classical music, like maybe even no dialogue, because we had the old cartoons, you would get things like Rhapsody Rabbit and What's Opera Doc, things that are based
Yeah.
around really specific classical pieces, and then they build a story around the music. And I was really hoping for just one of those in this. I didn't
Yeah.
get it, and I really, really want it. I feel like that's almost a necessity because that's like a staple of Looney Tunes. And I feel like
Oh,
it would
that's
be a really big missed opportunity if they don't do that in the future.
that is a good one because I am not, aside from the fact that I'm a huge classical music fan, a lot of my favorite Looney Tunes cartoons are the ones that are
Hmm.
like music, music where the plot is the plot is a kind of strong word, but where the action is driven by music, like the Rhapsody Rabbit was like that, Rhapsody and Rivets, uh, Pigs in a Polka was kind of like that. Where it just the cartoon was just sort of centered around a certain classical music piece.
Hmm.
Those were really good, and I would also like to see that because that would really make it feel like they were trying to bring back the spirit of the old cartoons.
Hmm. Definitely. Well, I think that's all I've got. Do you have any other final thoughts that you want to say before we wrap it up?
No, no, I'm good. I We've talked about it all. I could keep going on about it because I love talking about it, but I'm just gonna be like gushing and I'm gonna sound like an idiot.
Okay, well, I think then we'll wrap that up for now. Do you want to let people know where they can find you?
Yeah, if you want to hear more of my opinions, you could just go to my Twitter. My Twitter handle is at ejunkie2014, and then I'll guide you to my blog and all my other stuff from there because I'm most active on Twitter. So if you just want my other formats, then I'll just guide you from there.
Okay, well, thanks for joining me. We'll have to do this again sometime. This is a lot of fun.
Yes, anytime you want to talk about Looney Tunes, I will be there.
Okay, well, we'll see you next time then.
All right, see you.
Thanks to Eli for joining me for this episode of I Heart Movies, or as I think I should just call episodes like this in the future, I Heart Animation. That's what the show was called on YouTube before the podcast spun out of it, and I originally wanted to do a podcast called I Heart Animation, but I went for the broader title so I could cover more than just cartoons. But I think I just might make it official and have these animation episodes be a series within a series like I do with my Disney movie marathon, or like I did with all my book-based series before I spun them out into every version ever. So anyway, thanks again to Eli for joining me on this episode of I Heart Animation, and if you want more from him, I'll have all his info linked in the description below. Eli will be back in August for an episode of my Disney Movie Marathon miniseries that I talked about at the beginning. However, before we get to that, we've got Christmas in July coming. I have some special guests lined up with a very diverse slate of films to talk about, but with the way my IRL schedule has been this month, my podcast schedule has not been finalized, so you'll just have to wait and be surprised when we get there. Hopefully July will start to slow things down for me, but either way I'll be doing my best to bring you brand new episodes to listen to, so we'll see you next time on I Heart Movies. Thanks for listening.